The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not the early morning quiet that settles before the world wakes up. This was a hollow silence, the kind that tells you something important is missing before your brain can catch up. The cello case should have been leaning against the wall by the window. It was always there, like a piece of furniture we built our lives around. Scuffed black edges. One broken latch that never quite closed unless you nudged it with your thumb. Inside it lived the sound that filled our house every evening at 6:30 sharp. But that morning, there was just an empty patch of carpet. A pale rectangle where the sun hit the floor and showed me exactly where it used to be. I stood there longer than I should have, coffee cooling in my hand, staring like if I waited long enough the case might reappear. Like this was some kind of test. Like the house was holding its breath. "Dad." My daughter's voice came from the hallway. "So, careful." Already apologetic for reasons she didn't yet understand. She stepped into the living room wearing the blue dress she'd picked out days ago. The recital dress. The one she twirled in front of the mirror, bow in hand, pretending the hallway was a stage and the cracked tile was a spotlight. Her eyes went straight to the corner. Then back to me. "It's not there," she said. Not a question. An observation. My chest tightened. "It should be," I said, and immediately hated how weak it sounded. She nodded slowly, like she was bracing herself. "Maybe Mom moved it?" I already knew that wasn't true. I told her to give me a minute. Told her to finish getting ready. She nodded again, too understanding for 11 years old, and walked back down the hall without another word. That's when the guilt hit me. Not panic. Not anger. Guilt. Because somewhere deep down, before the day even started, I knew this was my fault. I made the call I'd been avoiding. My mother answered on the second ring, cheerful, like it was any other morning. "Oh, good, you're up," she said. "We were just talking about you." "Where's the cello?" I asked. There was a pause. Just a fraction of a second too long. "Oh," she said lightly. "That thing? We took care of it." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What does that mean?" "Well, you weren't using it," she replied. "And honestly, it was just sitting there, collecting dust. My daughter plays it every day." Another pause. This one heavier. "We sold it," she said, like she was telling me she'd returned a sweater that didn't fit. The word didn't register at first. It just bounced around in my head, dull and meaningless. "Sold it," I repeated. "Yes. You should be grateful, actually. It fetched a very good price." My stomach dropped. "You didn't have permission." She sighed, already tired of the conversation. "We're family. We don't need permission." I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was on the edge of the couch, phone pressed to my ear, heart pounding like it was trying to warn me too late. "How much?" I asked. She hesitated. Then, proudly, $86,000. The room tilted. $86,000. I thought of my daughter's fingers, still too small to reach some of the stretches, the way she bit her lip when she missed a note and started again without being asked. I thought of the night my grandmother placed that cello in my hands and said, "This doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to whoever protects it." "What did you do with the money?" I asked. My mother's voice brightened again. "Your sister needed it. The kids deserved something nice. You'll see the pool, it's beautiful." The words landed one by one, each heavier than the last. "They're children," she continued. "This will give them memories." "So would music," I said, but she was already talking. "You're overreacting," she said. "She's just a child. If she's talented, she'll manage without it." Just a child. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. Down the hall, my daughter peeked around the corner. Her eyes searched my face, looking for answers I wasn't ready to give. "It's okay," she said quickly. Too quickly. Maybe I wasn't ready for the recital anyway. That's when something broke inside me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet crack. "No," I said, kneeling in front of her. "You were ready." She shrugged, trying to smile. "It's fine, Dad. I'll practice harder next time." I pulled her into my chest and held her tighter than usual, breathing in the familiar smell of shampoo and laundry soap, wishing I could rewind the last 10 minutes of my life. She didn't cry. That hurt more than if she had. We drove to the recital anyway. Borrowed cello. Borrowed bow. Borrowed confidence. She played beautifully. And I watched her flinch at every mistake like it confirmed something ugly she was starting to believe about herself. That night, after she went to bed, I called my grandmother. I didn't know what I expected. Anger. Tears. The sharp disappointment I'd spent my whole life trying to avoid. Instead, she laughed softly. "Oh," she said. "So they finally showed you." "Showed me what?" I asked. "That they never understood what the cello was for." "I'm so sorry," I said. "I should have protected it." "You still can," she replied. "Certain. But first, you need to understand something." I waited. "The cello was never about music," she said. The line sat between us, unfinished, heavy with meaning. I stared at the dark living room again. At the empty space by the window. For the first time, I realized the silence wasn't just missing sound. It was waiting. And whatever came next was going to ask me who I really was willing to be. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling fan as it cut the darkness into slow, repeating shadows. Every turn of the blades felt like a question I'd been avoiding for years. When morning came, the house felt different. Quieter, but not in the same way as before. This wasn't the absence of music anymore. It was the absence of ease. Like the walls were watching me, waiting to see what I'd do next. My daughter ate her cereal without humming. That alone should have told me everything. She used to hum constantly. Scales, fragments of pieces she loved, little melodies she made up when she thought no one was listening. Now the spoon scraped the bowl in careful, deliberate motions. Controlled. As if noise itself had become something to be careful with. "You don't have to go to school today," I said. She shook her head. "I want to." I nodded, pretending not to notice how quickly she gathered her things, how she avoided looking at the corner where the cello case used to be. After I dropped her off, I sat in the car longer than necessary. The engine idled. My phone buzzed. A notification. My sister had posted photos. Bright blue water. Shiny tiles. Her kids grinning at the edge of a brand new pool, arms thrown around my parents like they were the heroes of the story. The caption read, "Family makes everything possible." I stared at the screen until my hands started to shake. I told myself not to react. That was always my move. Wait it out. Let things cool down. Don't escalate. Don't be dramatic. Don't make it worse. Those rules had kept the peace my entire life. They'd also cost me more than I was willing to admit. At work, I couldn't focus. Emails blurred together. Conversations drifted past me like static. Every time I tried to concentrate, my mind pulled me backward, years, decades, into moments I'd learned to survive by staying quiet. I remembered being 14, standing in the kitchen while my sister yelled at my parents about a missed competition. I'd been there too. I'd placed higher than her that year. No one mentioned it. Instead, my mother turned to me and said, "Be the mature one." That phrase followed me everywhere. Be the mature one. When my sister borrowed money and never paid it back. Be the mature one. When my parents forgot my birthday but planned an entire weekend for hers. Be the mature one. When I moved out early and supported myself so they wouldn't have to worry. Be the mature one. Maturity, I learned, was just another word for obedience. At lunch, I called my mother again. I don't know why. Some part of me still hoped there was a version of this conversation where she'd understand. "We need to talk," I said. She sighed. "About what exactly?" "About my daughter." There was the pause. Defensive already. "She'll be fine," my mother said. "You're projecting. Children bounce back." "She stopped playing," I replied. "She hasn't touched an instrument since." "Well," she said, "maybe that tells you something." The words hit harder than I expected. "Tells me what?" "That it wasn't meant to be," she said briskly. "Not everyone is cut out for these things. You were always too sensitive about your hobbies too." I closed my eyes. This wasn't about the cello anymore. This was about control. "You didn't even ask me," I said. "You would have said no," she replied, like that settled it. I almost laughed. Almost. That doesn't make it right. "You're being selfish," she snapped. "Family comes first." The old reflex kicked in, the urge to apologize, to soften my tone, to keep the bridge intact even if I had to burn myself to do it. Instead, I said nothing. Silence stretched between us. Uncomfortable. Unfamiliar. "Are you still there?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm just listening." I hung up a moment later, heart racing like I'd done something reckless. That afternoon, my daughter sat at the dining table doing homework. Her pencil hovered over the page longer than necessary. Finally, she looked up. "Dad." "Yeah." "Was the cello expensive?" I swallowed. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged. "Grandma said I should be grateful I even got to play something that nice." The air left my lungs. "She said that to you?" She nodded. "She said some kids never get anything, so I shouldn't be sad." I pulled out the chair beside her and sat down slowly. "You're allowed to be sad," I said. "You're allowed to be angry too." She frowned, thinking. "But then they'd be upset." There was the lesson being passed down. I saw myself in her eyes in that moment. The careful calculations. The way she weighed her feelings against other people's comfort. Something in me hardened, not into anger, but into clarity. That evening, after she went to bed, I opened my laptop and started looking things up. Ownership laws. Estate documentation. Old emails. Photos of my grandmother handing me the cello, the note she'd tucked inside the case. For safekeeping, it read, "For the next generation." I'd always thought that meant storage. I was starting to understand it meant responsibility. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my sister. "Why are you making this such a big deal? It's just an instrument. Don't tear the family apart over this." I stared at the words. Just an instrument. Just like I'd always been just the easy one. The reasonable one. The one who would eventually let it go. For the first time, I didn't reply. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet living room, looking at that empty space by the window. I imagined the sound coming back. Not the same as before, but stronger. More deliberate. I realized something then that scared me more than confrontation ever had. If I stayed silent now, my daughter would learn the same lesson I did. That keeping the peace mattered more than protecting what you love. And I wasn't willing to pay that price again. That night, I picked up the phone and dialed my grandmother's number. "I think I finally understand what you meant," I said when she answered. She didn't ask me to explain. "Good," she replied. "Then the next part will be easier." I stared into the dark, heart steady but resolved. For the first time in my life, obedience no longer felt like maturity. It felt like a choice. And I was getting ready to make a different one. Anger didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as clarity. The morning after I called my grandmother, I woke up with a strange calm in my chest. Not peace, nothing that generous, but focus. The kind that sharpens your senses and strips away excuses. I made coffee, packed my daughter's lunch, kissed the top of her head as she rushed out the door. She smiled, small and careful, like she didn't want to take up too much emotional space. That smile stayed with me all day. At work, I did the bare minimum. My real attention was elsewhere: documents, timestamps, memories. I searched my inbox for old messages. Found photos from years ago. My grandmother standing in my living room, her hand resting on the cello case, her eyes serious as she looked at me. "You protect what matters," she'd said. I hadn't understood then. I thought she meant locking doors. Insurance policies. Physical safety. I was learning she meant something much harder. By noon, I had the receipt. Not the kind you print and tape to a fridge, the kind that confirms something irreversible. A digital transaction record from the auction house my parents used. Item description. Serial number. Date of sale. $86,000. Seeing the number in black and white did something to me. It stripped away the last layer of denial. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't panic or desperation. This was a choice. I printed everything. That evening, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. The familiar streets felt smaller than they used to, like I'd outgrown them without realizing it. Their porch light was on. My mother answered the door with the same polite smile she used on neighbors. "Oh," she said. You should have called. I know, I replied. We need to talk. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner and old furniture. Everything in its place. Everything untouched by consequence. My father sat in his usual chair, eyes on the television. He didn't look at me when I walked in. I found the paperwork, I said, placing the folder on the coffee table. My mother glanced down at it, then back at me. And? You sold something that wasn't yours, I said. She scoffed. Don't be dramatic. It was entrusted to me, I continued, by Grandma, for safekeeping. My father finally spoke. It was in our house. That doesn't make it yours. My mother crossed her arms. We raised you. We paid for your education. We helped you when you needed it. There was the ledger. Every favor tallied. Every sacrifice weaponized. You didn't ask, I said. You would have said no, she replied again, louder this time, like volume could turn logic into morality. I opened the folder and slid the receipt toward her. You sold it for $86,000. She looked at the paper, unimpressed. And? Your sister needed it. For a pool, I said. For her children, she corrected. I laughed then. A short, hollow sound that surprised all of us. You didn't steal from me, I said quietly. You stole from her. My mother's jaw tightened. Watch your tone. No, I said. I'm done watching it. Silence filled the room, thick and unfamiliar. My father shifted uncomfortably. You're making this into something it doesn't need to be, he muttered. I didn't make it anything, I replied. I'm just naming it. My mother leaned forward. Family doesn't take family to court. I met her eyes. Family doesn't sell a child's inheritance either. Her face hardened. So that's it? You're choosing an object over us? I shook my head slowly. I'm choosing my daughter. That was when she stood up. You've always been ungrateful, she snapped. Always acting like we did something wrong by asking you to be reasonable. Reasonable. The word landed like a slap. I gathered the papers and stood. My legs felt steady. Stronger than I expected. I'm not here to argue, I said. I'm here to tell you this isn't over. My father finally looked at me then. There was something like fear in his eyes. Or maybe it was recognition. On the drive home, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from my sister this time. What are you doing? Mom is devastated. Why do you always have to cause problems? I didn't answer. At home, my daughter was at the kitchen table, tracing lines in her notebook. When she saw me, she looked up cautiously. Did I do something wrong? She asked. The question hit me harder than anything my parents had said. No, I said immediately, sitting beside her. None of this is because of you. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me. I took her hand. You didn't lose the cello because you weren't good enough. You lost it because adults made a selfish choice. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone and called a lawyer. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. I only knew what I wasn't going to do anymore. I wasn't going to explain myself into silence. I wasn't going to negotiate my child's worth. I wasn't going to confuse peace with surrender. When I hung up, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from my grandmother. Proud of you, it read. Now be ready. People don't give up power quietly. I stared at the screen, heart steady, resolve hardening. For the first time, the number didn't scare me anymore. $86,000 wasn't the cost of the cello. It was the price my parents paid to prove who they were. And it was the moment I stopped pretending otherwise. I met my grandmother 2 days later at her apartment. It was the same place she'd lived in for as long as I could remember. 3rd floor, no elevator, narrow hallway that smelled faintly of old books and boiled tea. Every step up the stairs felt heavier than it should have, like I wasn't just climbing floors, but years. She opened the door before I knocked. You look tired, she said, studying my face the way only someone who's known you your whole life can. I feel awake, I replied. She smiled at that and stepped aside. Her living room was small but intentional. Nothing wasted. Nothing excessive. A life edited down to what mattered. The same way she'd always lived. Quiet strength, no performance. We sat at the small wooden table by the window. She poured tea without asking how I liked it, because she already knew. "You finally stopped apologizing," she said, handing me the cup. I looked up. "What?" "In your voice," she clarified. "When you called me the other night, you weren't asking me to forgive you. You were telling me what you were going to do." I let that settle. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing," I admitted. She nodded. "That's how you know it matters." We drank in silence for a moment. Outside, a bus groaned to a stop. Somewhere below us, someone laughed. "Tell me," she said finally, "what do you think the cello was?" I hesitated. "An inheritance. Something valuable. Something you loved." She shook her head gently. "Those are surface answers." She stood and crossed the room, opening a drawer I hadn't noticed before. Inside were papers, old, yellowed, carefully folded. She brought them back to the table and spread them out. "Your great-grandfather built that cello," she said. "Not as a craftsman. As a man who needed to prove something to himself." I frowned. "Prove what?" "That he could create something that outlasted him," she replied. "Something no one could take unless he allowed it." She looked at me, eyes sharp despite her age. Every generation, it was given to the one who felt things deeply, but learned too early to stay quiet about them. My throat tightened. "Your father wasn't chosen," she continued. "He mistakes authority for love. And your mother," she exhaled slowly, "she believes control keeps people close." I stared at the table. "So why me?" "Because you question yourself," she said immediately. "Men who question themselves are dangerous to systems that rely on silence." I thought of my daughter, of the way she measured her emotions against everyone else's comfort. "You gave it to me to protect," I said. "Yes," my grandmother replied. "Not to store. Not to hide. To protect the meaning of it." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "That cello was never about music," she said again. "It was about whether you would break the pattern." The words landed slowly, but when they did, they hit everywhere at once. I'd spent my life thinking strength meant endurance. That being a good man meant absorbing impact quietly so others wouldn't have to. But sitting there, I realized something terrifying. Silence doesn't end cycles. It preserves them. "What happens now?" I asked. She leaned back in her chair. "Now you decide what kind of father you are." She slid one of the papers toward me. It was a copy of her will. My name was highlighted. "There's a clause," she said, "in case the instrument was ever sold without consent. It gives you standing. Legal and moral." My pulse quickened. "You planned for this." "I planned for people being who they are," she corrected. "And for you becoming who you needed to be." I swallowed. "If I do this, it won't be quiet." She smiled. Not kindly. Proudly. "Good," she said. "Change rarely is." When I left her apartment, the city felt sharper. Louder. Like my senses had been turned up. At home, my daughter sat on the couch scrolling through videos. When she saw me, she straightened. "Did you talk to great-grandma?" she asked. "Yes," I said, sitting beside her. "And I want you to hear something clearly." She looked at me, serious now. "You didn't lose anything because you weren't enough," I said. "You lost it because some people confuse taking with deserving." She nodded slowly, absorbing it. "Am I still allowed to love music?" she asked. The question nearly broke me. "You're allowed to love whatever makes you feel alive," I said. "And you don't owe anyone an apology for it." That night, after she fell asleep, I reread the will. I wasn't just holding paperwork. I was holding a line drawn across generations. For the first time, the fear wasn't about what I might lose. It was about what I'd let continue if I stayed silent. And I knew then, absolutely unmistakably, the cello had already done its job. The next step wouldn't be symbolic. It would be real. The paperwork felt heavier than it should have. Not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. Every page was proof of intent, of pattern, of a line that had already been crossed long before I noticed it was there. I spread the documents across my kitchen table late one night, long after my daughter had gone to sleep. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence didn't feel hollow. It felt alert, like something waiting to be named. I read everything twice. Then a third time. The will. The clause. The documentation from the auction house. The messages my mother sent afterward, dismissive and defensive in equal measure. Each piece clicked into place like a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. This wasn't impulsive. It was systematic. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I expected the conversation to feel dramatic. Sure. Maybe even vengeful. Instead, it was almost disappointingly calm. She sold property she didn't have legal authority over, he said, voice neutral. And the funds were redistributed without consent. You have standing. Standing. The word echoed. For most of my life, I'd been sitting, waiting for permission to speak, to push back, to matter. What would this look like? I asked. He explained the process. The steps. The timelines. No guarantees, no promises of emotional satisfaction. Just clarity. When I hung up, my hands were steady. I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolved. That afternoon, my parents called. I let it ring. Then my sister. I let that ring too. By the time I picked up, my mother's voice was already tight with accusation. Why are you dragging other people into this? She demanded. Do you have any idea how this makes us look? I leaned against the counter, eyes on the empty space by the window. I'm not dragging anyone, I said. I'm responding. You're tearing the family apart, she snapped. No, I replied. I'm refusing to be quiet. There it was again. Silence on the other end. The sound of a dynamic shifting. You've changed, she said finally. Yes, I agreed. I have. She lowered her voice, the way she always did when she wanted control back. Think about your daughter. Do you really want her growing up in the middle of this mess? My jaw tightened. She's already in it, I said. You just didn't think she noticed. That night, my daughter came into the living room carrying a rented cello. The school had arranged it quietly, kindly. I can practice a little, she said. Not asking. Checking. I nodded. Of course. She sat on the edge of the couch, posture stiff, movements cautious. The first note wobbled. Then steadied. Then wobbled again. I watched her fight the instinct to stop. She kept going. Halfway through, she grimaced. I'm not very good anymore. I shook my head. You're just scared. She considered that. Will they be mad if I keep playing? The question landed deep. No, I said firmly. And even if they were, it wouldn't matter. She looked at me, searching my face. Because you're allowed to take up space, I continued. With sound. With feelings. With whatever you love. She nodded, then played louder. Not perfect, but brave. The next day, I sent the letter. Not angry. Not threatening. It outlined the facts. The expectations. The request for restitution. A timeline. When the confirmation email came back, I felt something loosen in my chest. I wasn't asking anymore. I was stating. My sister called that evening. You're unbelievable, she said. Do you know what Mom's been saying about you? I can imagine, I replied. She thinks you're doing this out of spite. I paused. I'm doing this out of responsibility. There was a scoff. You always think you're better than us. No, I said calmly. I just stopped thinking I was less. She hung up. That night, I sat alone and waited for the doubt to come rushing back. It didn't. What came instead was something quieter, heavier, truer. The understanding that boundaries don't end relationships. They reveal them. I didn't know how my parents would respond. I didn't know what this would cost me socially, emotionally, financially. But for the first time, the cost of staying silent was clear. And it was one I refused to pay again. When I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I passed the empty corner by the window. I didn't look away this time. I stood there for a moment and imagined the space filled, not with the old sound, but with something stronger. A future where my daughter never has to ask if she's allowed to be heard. The line had been drawn. And I wasn't stepping back. The response came faster than I expected. Not a letter. Not a lawyer. A family meeting. My mother called first, voice controlled to the point of tremor. "We need to sit down like adults," she said. "This has gone far enough." I almost laughed at the irony. Almost. We met at their house again. Same living room. Same lemon cleaner. Same television murmuring in the background like a distraction that had outlived its usefulness. This time, I didn't bring documents. I brought myself. My sister was already there, arms crossed, foot tapping, eyes sharp with the kind of anger that comes from being inconvenienced, not wronged. My father sat where he always did, posture collapsed inward, as if shrinking could absolve him of responsibility. My mother gestured for me to sit. I didn't. "Let's get this over with," she said. "We'll pay you back. Eventually. But you need to drop this legal nonsense." "Pay me back?" I asked. "This isn't about me." She waved a hand. "You know what I mean." "No," I said calmly. "I don't." My sister scoffed. "You're acting like some kind of hero. You've always needed to feel morally superior." I looked at her then, really looked. The entitlement. The certainty that someone else would absorb the fallout. "This isn't about being superior," I said. "It's about being responsible." My mother's patience snapped. "You're humiliating us," she said. "Dragging lawyers into family business. What kind of son does that?" The question hovered, loaded. For a split second, the old reflex twitched, the urge to explain myself into smaller words, to soften the edges, to earn back approval. I let it pass. "The kind who protects his child," I said. Silence fell. My father cleared his throat. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. "We're still your parents." I nodded. "And I'm still her father." My sister leaned forward. "If you go through with this, don't expect us to be there for you anymore." There was the threat. Estrangement dressed up as consequence. I felt it land in my chest, not as fear, but as grief. Not for what I was losing, but for what I'd never actually had. "I'm not choosing between you and her," I said. "I'm choosing her." My mother stood abruptly. "So that's it?" "Yes," I said. "That's it." The meeting ended without resolution. No raised voices. No dramatic exits. Just a quiet understanding that something irreversible had happened. On the drive home, my hands shook for the first time in weeks. Not from doubt. From release. That night, my daughter sat beside me on the couch, rented cello resting against her shoulder. She played a short piece, hesitant at first, then stronger. When she finished, she looked up. "Was that okay?" she asked. "It was brave," I said. "That matters more." She smiled, small but real. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "If you don't stop this, you will lose your family." I stared at the screen, then typed a response I never would have sent before. "I won't lose my daughter." I didn't wait for a reply. Later, alone in bed, the fear finally came, not of confrontation, but of aftermath. Holidays. Birthdays. Empty chairs. The quiet punishment of distance. I breathed through it. I thought of my daughter's question from earlier in the week. Will they be mad if I keep playing? If I stopped now, she'd learn the answer was yes. If I continued, she'd learn something else entirely. That silence only has power when we believe it keeps us safe. The next morning, the lawyer called. "They've retained counsel," he said. "This will proceed." I looked out the window at the empty corner of the room, sunlight spilling across the floor. "Good," I replied. For the first time, I understood something clearly. This wasn't the day my family broke. It was the day the story changed. And whatever came next, I wasn't going back. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Plain envelope. No return address I didn't recognize. I stood at the kitchen counter holding it longer than necessary, thumb pressed against the edge, feeling the weight of what it meant. Not fear. Not anymore. Just inevitability. This was the part no one talks about when they tell you to stand up for yourself. The part where the consequences actually show up. Inside was the formal notice. Mediation scheduled. Documentation acknowledged. Assets traced. Language so dry it almost made me laugh. Almost. I placed the letter beside the coffee maker and went about my morning routine. Packed lunch. Signed a permission slip. watched my daughter tie her shoes with intense concentration, tongue pressed lightly to the corner of her mouth. "Big day?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "But a good one." She nodded, trusting me in a way I hadn't fully earned yet. The mediation took place in a small conference room downtown. Neutral walls. Neutral table. Neutral faces pretending neutrality is the same as absence of power. My parents sat across from me. They looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker. Just exposed. Their lawyer spoke first, framing the sale as a misunderstanding. A family decision made in good faith. A matter blown out of proportion. I listened without interrupting. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue emotion. I told the truth. I spoke about consent, about stewardship, about a child learning what happens when the adults in her life ignore her boundaries. I watched my mother's face harden, then flicker. For the first time, she wasn't controlling the narrative. The mediator asked questions, clarified timelines, confirmed documentation, facts stacked neatly against intention. When the session ended, nothing was resolved, but everything had shifted. They could no longer pretend this was about hurt feelings. It was about accountability. That afternoon, my phone lit up. Extended family. Questions. Rumors. Carefully worded concern. I answered a few. Briefly. Honestly. "I'm protecting my daughter," I said, over and over, until the words stopped feeling defensive and started feeling declarative. That evening, we attended the recital. Not the original one. Another. Smaller venue. Folding chairs. Parents holding phones too high. My daughter walked onto the stage with the rented cello tucked under her arm. She took a breath before she played. I held mine. The first note rang out, slightly sharp. She adjusted. Kept going. Halfway through, she found her footing. The sound filled the room, imperfect but alive. I felt something loosen in my chest. This was the moment my parents had tried to steal. And failed. Afterward, she ran to me, eyes bright. "I didn't stop," she said. I knelt to her level. "I know." That night, the final message came. From my mother. "We didn't think you'd really go through with it." I stared at the words for a long time. Then I typed back. "I didn't think I could either." I set the phone down and sat in the quiet living room. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like pressure. It felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to choose. Silence had stopped protecting anyone. And in its place, something stronger had finally begun. The house didn't change overnight. The corner by the window stayed empty. The walls didn't suddenly hum with sound. Nothing magical happened when the conflict ended. No cinematic swell of music to signal that everything was fixed. What changed was quieter than that. I noticed it a week later, early in the morning, while making coffee. My daughter was at the dining table, her back to me, shoulders relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. The rented cello rested against her knee. Not carefully. Not nervously. Comfortably. She drew the bow across the strings, slow and deliberate. The note wasn't perfect, but it was confident. It didn't ask permission to exist. I leaned against the counter and listened. The music sounded different now. Not because the instrument had changed, but because she had. And because I had. The legal process continued quietly after that. No shouting. No dramatic apologies. Just paperwork, timelines, and a resolution that forced restitution without spectacle. My parents didn't call. My sisters stopped texting. The distance settled in like weather, unpleasant at first, then simply part of the landscape. I grieved it. Not loudly. Not all at once. I grieved the family I thought I had. The version of them I kept alive by absorbing disappointment and calling it loyalty. Letting go of that illusion hurt more than the confrontation ever did. But the pain didn't hollow me out. It made room. One afternoon, my grandmother came over. She sat in her usual chair, hands folded in her lap, listening as my daughter played. When the last note faded, she smiled. "She stands differently now," she said. I nodded. "So do I." My grandmother looked at me for a long moment. "You did what most men never do," she said. "You chose to be remembered differently." That night, after everyone went to bed, I stood by the window and looked at the empty space one last time. I realized something then. I hadn't failed to protect the cello. I'd succeeded in protecting what it was meant to teach. Strength isn't endurance. It isn't swallowing anger or pretending not to notice when something sacred is taken from you. Strength is the moment you decide that your silence is doing more harm than your voice ever could. My daughter finished her piece and looked up at me. Dad. Yeah. Can we get another cello someday? I smiled. Yes. But not yet. Why? Because this one is teaching you something important, I said. She thought about that, then nodded, satisfied. Later, lying in bed, I reflected on the man I used to be. The one who confused peace with compliance. The one who believed being a good son meant being a quiet one. I don't hate that man. He did the best he could with what he knew. But I'm not him anymore. When the music finally returns fully, when a new cello fills that corner by the window, it won't be a symbol of loss. It will be a reminder that the moment everything changed wasn't when something was stolen. It was when I stopped letting silence decide who I was. The music didn't come back the same. It came back honest. And so did I.